AFINet webinar. If I counted correctly, this should be webinar 24. And we started 2.5 years ago, and still there are enough topics to be covered. And many thanks also to Richard Wellerman, who made all this possible. And as you know and might have seen on the website, AFINet is a small-scale charity. So this is why we write all of you along with the invitation link that we would welcome donations if you could afford that, which is helpful because we got no regular income. And from this year on, we moved to a bi-monthly format regarding the webinars, but we are determined to continue to provide these webinars in the future. And I also would like to remember all of you that this year in June, from June 15 and 16, there will be a face-to-face AFINet conference in Rotterdam, and abstracts can still be submitted via the AFINet website just until February 28, and there'll be no longer time frame. So hopefully a few of you are still planning to submit, and I hope to see all of you in the real world in Rotterdam by June. So today it's a great pleasure to welcome Anders Hammarberg from Stockholm. He's an associate professor at the Department of Clinical Neuroscience and Center for Psychiatric Research at Karolinska. And he is also working clinically as a licensed psychotherapist at Stockholm Center for Dependency Disorders with a focus on cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing for people with substance use disorders, primarily alcohol use disorders, which are the most common disorders in the European countries. And he's a research group leader at Karolinska with a focus in his research on psychological treatment for alcohol use disorders, support programs for close ones to people with substance use disorders, and harm reduction programs for people who inject drugs. And I also want to acknowledge Ola Siljeholm, who is a doctoral student who, as far as I understood, Anders, has done a lot of work for this presentation, but who unfortunately caught a cold. So we all wish him to be in a good shape soon. But so today's presentation will be led entirely by Anders, which will be about the community reinforcement and family training offered online in a Swedish study. And so I'll hand over to you, Anders, and you got 45 minutes roundabout, and then there will be space for questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gaius. Now I got a little bit embarrassed. That was not a short bio. I'm very sorry. It never stopped. But thank you very much, and it's very nice to be a part of this network now. Thanks to Richard. I should have been a member for a long time ago, but better late than never. As you said, unfortunately, Ola couldn't be here, otherwise he would have held this presentation, or we should have done it together, but now I do it instead. So I'll try to share the screen, and then I won't be able to see you, unfortunately. So if you, for my sake, you can interrupt me and ask questions whenever you want, or if you want to have all the discussions at the end. But but please feel free to state questions. But I can't see if you ask something in the chat or anything. So
if I just step in,
yeah.
I think usually we have the discussion after
Okay.
you finished your presentation, because otherwise it might get a bit complicated.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
if you got any questions during the presentations, just write them in the chat. And apparently some people seem to have problems to see your slides.
Aha, okay.
So I can see them actually, but Richard and Alicia, they will log out and come back. So I hope
I can see them. I was just asking Alicia.
okay,
I
yeah,
can see
yeah.
them. And Dave and Tina can see them.
Okay,
Okay,
wonderful.
So it seems to work then, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Seems like. Okay.
Yeah.
So back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the title of the presentation is Craft plus Parent Training Delivered Online, a randomized controlled trial. And just to say something about the context of this study. So I was part of developing an alcohol treatment unit in Stockholm for about 10 years now. And quite shortly after we started this unit, we recognized that a large part of the persons that contacted us was actually relatives or close ones to people with alcohol problems, and we didn't at the time have anything to offer them. So that's why we, since then, approximately 6 or 7 years, have started up quite an extensive research and clinical program for close ones to people with mainly alcohol problems. So I have two PhD students. One is Ola and another is Karin Romberg, in which we do studies on treatment or support programs for close ones to people with substance use disorders. It can be parents to young adults with substance use disorders, or partners to people with alcohol use disorders. And we have done quite a few studies on internet-based intervention, of which this is one of those internet-delivered interventions. So what I will present is briefly some background to this study, and of course a presentation of the program that we wanted to investigate in this study, which in English is called the SPARE program, Supportive Parenting and Reinforcement, which is a combination of a program that I think that most of you are familiar with, the CRAFT program that Gaius mentioned initially, and parental support program, which I will describe later in this presentation. And I actually want to present two studies from this project. One was a randomized controlled trial, and another was a qualitative study in which we interviewed participants in this SPARE program about their experiences. Some conclusions, and then at the end, hopefully, a discussion about how we can support this target group. And the target group here is, for this study, is children that are exposed to parent with alcohol or substance use problems. Since we know that they have an increased risk of themselves developing alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder later, and also are vulnerable in other respects, as higher risk for psychiatric problems and the like. There are no certain estimations about, exactly how many children in Sweden are affected, but I'll come to some figures later on. But what we know is that only a very small fraction of these, approximately 380,000 affected children, take part in any support intervention. So that is we have a problem in reaching out to this population. But what we know is that internet interventions might be one way to reach people in general who is not prone to seek other treatment. And that we know that we can say that now we know more about also internet delivered treatments for alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder and the like. But when we started this study, the field was somewhat younger. This was in 2016, I think, when we started to plan this program. So it has happened a lot since then. We know that parental training programs are efficacious in improving child behavioral and emotional problems. And one way to accomplish that is to increase what we call positive parental behaviors and in reducing parental stress. And the program that I will present involves some components that are in this direction. So the affected children in Sweden, what do we know? Well, there are no sort of population-based studies recent, but there was one publication in 2019, which was actually a literature review on Swedish but also international studies trying to estimate the prevalence of children affected from a parent with alcohol use problems, which could be risky drinking or a more severe state of alcohol use disorder. And here you can see that the approximate prevalence was that around 20% of children in Sweden are exposed in some way to parental drinking that might be problematic, and that 15% approximately are negatively affected. And that, I mean, that is of course a broad dimension, that have experienced negative events or have problematic feelings regarding the parental alcohol use, or were much more negatively affected, defined as having to seek help because of this, or that the patient had a very severe alcohol use disorder, which could result in that children have to be cared for by another person. But that's of course a small fraction of the children in Sweden. But there are quite a lot of them. And how can we help these children? Well, there are several limitations in previous research on this group. First, we know very little about how to support and help the co-parent to someone who suffers from alcohol problems. That is the person, if you call it the healthy person in a relationship where one parent have alcohol problems. And that there are few interventions with an aim to improve parental self-efficacy when in a relationship where the other parent have alcohol problems. And that there are no study targeting this group, which we called concerned significant others, with a combined treatment approach that both target the negative aspects of being a parent together with someone with alcohol use disorder, but also kind of improving the situation regarding the alcohol use disorder, which is one of the targets in CRAFT. Talking about CRAFT, community reinforcement approach and family training. CRAFT is a treatment program for concerned significant others, for person suffering from problematic substance use. That could be alcohol or other substances. It's based on cognitive behavioral theory and motivational interviewing with 3 main goals: to improve the quality of life for concerned significant others, and to support the relative, the one who has alcohol problems, to decrease alcohol or drug consumption, but also to seek help, to improve the quality of life for the concerned significant others by support sober and healthy activities together. So 3 main goals. The effect of craft, if we look at in the literature, there are one quite recent systematic review comprising 10 studies, in which the primary outcome measure, as you know, most often in these studies are treatment entry rates of the affected person, the person with the substance use disorder. And we see figures ranging from 40 to 86%, much depending on the context in which craft is delivered, how we understood. And craft, as well as other active control conditions, increase the quality of life for the concerned significant others. And as I said, this program is a combination program of craft and a parental support program, which is called All Children in Focus in an English translation. It's focused on parents to children between 3 to 11 years of age, also based on cognitive behavioral therapy, with the aim of positive reinforcement, increasing the positive activities together between the parent and the child, increasing communication skills from the parent to the child, prevent and handle conflict, and also comprise sessions regarding rules and boundaries in being a parent to a child with to a child. So the positive effects in these studies are increased parent-rated child well-being, parental self-efficacy, and has proven to be a cost-effective intervention. So the aim of this research program was to investigate if an internet-delivered self-administered program called SPARE was more efficacious than an active control group who received only psychoeducational material. So this was not a therapist-supported program, but a self-administered program in improving the psychological health of the children affected by parental alcohol use, as rated from the parent. So the method designed a randomized controlled superiority trial comparing SPARE to an active control group who received only information. I'll come back to the more specifics in a short while. Participants, a parent sharing a child in the age 3 to 11 years of age with a partner with problematic alcohol use. Inclusion criteria, well, the CSO, the concerned significant other, the parent, the healthy parent, so to say, should of course have no alcohol or substance use problem themselves or regular use of illicit drugs, and no severe mental health problems, and of course not currently participating in any other support program, and importantly not under current threat of violence from the co-parent with alcohol use disorder. Since then, if that was obvious, we wanted to refer those parents to some other kind of intervention, since this was not a therapist-supported program. We also had inclusion criteria for the co-parent with alcohol problems. They should have an audit C score above 4 or 5 for women or men, indicating a problematic and regular alcohol use, and or above 2 or more ICD-10 criteria for alcohol dependence, and no regular use of illicit drugs. And these two should be parents to a child between 3 and 11, as I said, and who should be living at least 4 days per month with the drinking parents, and scoring above a population mean on a subscale total score on the parent rated strengths and difficulties questionnaire is SDQ. And I'll come back to the scores on this scale in a short while. So I hope you manage to follow me. It's always a difficult when you talk about all these relations. There are a parent and a co-parent with alcohol problems who have a child together. I hope that is clear. And everything is rated by the participating co-parent. Primary outcome measure: changes in child's psychological health at 3 months after inclusion, as measured by a scale called Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, SDQ, parent rated, which is a validated scale for measuring different kind of behavioral and emotional problems in children. Secondary outcomes: depression, anxiety, and stress for the participating concerned significant other, and co-parents' alcohol consumption and parental self-efficacy. So the program, in short, what did it contain? Self-delivered anonymous participants. As I said, the participants did not receive any therapist support, but did 4 modules with core components as we defined from CRAFT and this parent training program, focused on how to take care of yourself, improve your quality of life by components in CRAFT, how to handle the co-parents drinking, also components in CRAFT, and core components in parental training from this All Children in Focus. Minimum time in program was 4 weeks and maximum time was 12 weeks. And they got a new assignment after the end of each module, a kind of a homework assignment that they were supposed to work with in between sessions. And they also had access to a chat forum at all time. So functional analysis, I think you recognize this: positive reinforcement, communication skill, practice conversation on treatment seeking, CRAFT components, increased time spent with the child, increased frequency of positive activities for CSO alone and for children, a part of this parent training program. So focusing on different aspects that this parent might have in having a child together with a person who have an alcohol use disorder. The active control condition, psychoeducational material, also not therapist guided, only received information, 4 modules distributed weekly, no exercises between these modules, but a chat forum available at all time. And the topics in this psychoeducation was information about being a CSO to an individual with alcohol problems, information about AUD and dependence in general, I mean, the features of this condition and so on, information about taking care of yourself and your family, but very, very brief information, and some information on how to get more help in the situation. And this study was published last year in Addiction Science and Clinical Practice. And the results, well, we aim to recruit 300 participants to this program, but it turned out that it was very difficult to recruit all these 300 participants. It was a slow pace of inclusion, both due to that it was a lower kind of frequency of parents showing interest for the program, even though we advertised quite frequently, mainly in social media, Facebook and Instagram, but also in newspapers. But also due to that, a large fraction of those interested to participate had to be excluded at baseline registration, and there were multiple reasons possible, but most common was that the CSO experienced a threat or had actually been subjected to a co-parent violence, and those were excluded by that reason. Well, you can see for yourself there were also other reasons for non-participation, but that was the most common. So we ended up in 106 eligible for randomization. 30 of these did not return, and we ended up in 76 finally included in the study. So who did we reach? Well, not very surprisingly, we reached almost only women, 96%, with a mean age of 42, and the age of the child was 7.65 years old. Relationship to the partner, most commonly a current partner living together, but also ex-partner in 15% of the cases approximately. The co-parent, how severely affected were they according to the CSO? Well, an audit score of 8, which indicates moderate alcohol problem, reaching for the more severe actually, and ICD-10 criteria 4.2 as a mean. So a moderately severe co-parent population according to CSO. So what did we find in this study regarding the primary outcome? As you remember, it was the Children's Mental Health Questionnaire, SDQ. Just to say something, the cutoff score on SDQ for, at least in Swedish Swedish studies, is between 13 and 14 to indicate actual behavioral, emotional, or other significant problems. So at baseline, according to parent rating, these children were affected. We don't know, why they were affected, just that they were affected according to the parents. So just at the clinical level affected. And as you see, we saw no differences between conditions over time, and no significant change in SDQ scores over time either. We did not see that the parents rated the children as improving in their condition during the follow-up period, which was 12 weeks. Most parents had gone through the program at 8 weeks, so the 12 weeks follow-up can be considered as a sort of post-treatment follow-up 1 month after. Quite a short follow-up time, but at least we didn't see any indication of improvement in among the children on this scale. What we did see was improvements regarding co-parents' alcohol consumption, again as rated by the CSO, and also regarding severity of dependence and self-efficacy in handling co-parent alcohol consumption. And here are in the bars here show the scores on ICD-10 criteria and audit C, and there was a significant decrease in both these scales at 3 months follow-up after 12 weeks. However, we did not see any differences between conditions between this SPARE program and the educational program. So both programs seem to improve the drinking status of the co-parent in similar degree. So the conclusion from the RCT, children's mental health assessed by parents at almost clinical level at baseline. So the children seem to be affected, probably, but not, we're not sure about that, by the situation with one drinking parent. We could not see any between group effects of the SPARE program, so no superiority of this program over the psychoeducational program. It was a difficult population to recruit, which made that we ended up in, of course, a limited statistical power to find differences, even if they might have been there. Surprisingly to us was the large fraction of CSOs that reported that they were under threat of co-parent violence. That came somewhat to a surprise to us in this otherwise quite socially integrated and so on population. Of course, we were interested in the experience of the participants of the program, primarily of the SPARE program, in order to find information on how to improve the program, or develop the program, or if we should aim for some other kind of support. What were the experiences, and why did they seek treatment? So the aim was to describe the experience of participants in this internet-delivered support program for co-parents of persons with problematic consumption of alcohol. The specific aim to study reasons for seeking support as described by the parents, and study how the parents perceived the effect that the program had on themselves, the children, and the drinking co-parent. So at the end of the study, for each participant, we asked if they wanted to participate in an interview, and we recruited three females who had at least completed 2 modules of the SPARE. It was in all, and semi-structured interviews, and the analysis was by qualitative content analysis. In this table, you can see the main 2 research questions, so to say, the reasons for seeking support and perceived effects of the program, ordered in categories and subcategories. So the reasons for seeking support: coping with co-parent drinking. They wanted to find help to handle the situation with an escalation in drinking and alcohol-related consequences. They wanted to achieve new coping strategies in the relation to the co-parent. They also they also wanted emotional validation and support in their situation. They felt alone and didn't have anyone to talk to about the situation. They were worrying about the children, of course, and they were interested in what kind of available support there were for the co-parent with alcohol problem. The perceived effects of the program. Well, they reported that the program helped them to change their behavior in important aspects in interaction with the children, in taking care of themselves, improving the quality of life, and also to cope with a co-parent. They felt that they received acknowledgement in the situation and relief in the situation. And they also mentioned parts that were missing in the program. So just some examples of what they expressed after participating in this program. An example regarding emotional validation and support for myself. Yes, I noticed feeling bad. I understood that I needed help in some ways as well, and that I would perhaps, I don't know, but I needed help to feel a little better since I didn't have anyone to talk to. Perceptions of available support. I live in a small town. I could say that, I mean, the participants came from all over Sweden in this study. They were recruited from countrywide, so to say. It wasn't only in Stockholm or anything. It was the whole Sweden. So some lived in small towns. I kind of felt like I didn't want to contact anyone because it becomes so obvious. It's always people you know working in the same field. So I thought, well, maybe there is something on the internet. So I started to Google and found this. An anonymous tool like this was very valuable. Acknowledgement and relief, because you get called crazy a lot when living with such a person with alcohol problems. A lot of things become normalized. So when you ask these questions, it was a kind of acknowledgement that I've been living with a man with a disease, one participant said. And that is it. It's easy, of course, to understand that might be felt like a relief. Interaction with the children. The children get a little, I wouldn't say forgotten, but you focus so much on other things with thoughts and everything. And there were really good exercises and thoughts, like this thing that you are supposed to take 10 minutes with them and things like that. I think it was really good. That was part of the program, my comment here, that they should devote 10 minutes or more every day to just focus and play with the children and don't do anything else. And that was acknowledged as helpful. Coping with the co-parent. Like, what a nice weekend we've had, instead of like, how nice that you didn't get hammered today. You know what I mean? Really try to talk to him in another way. And I hope that has had a positive effect on him. That was regarding the communication skills training that is a part of the CRAFT program, of course. So the qualitative study conclusion, the parents belong to a group new to the research literature. Boring, absent, and sometimes neglectful fathers are strenuous to mothers and children. Mothers unsure if they were eligible for support. They weren't sure if they sort of would fit in to a support program. They wanted strategies to deal with the co-parents drinking. The program was helpful with validation and confirmation of the situation, and helpful regarding increased focus on the children, better relationship with them. It was regarded that anonymity and availability of the program was important. And last slide, conclusion of the total project. This was a target population harder to reach than we expected. We thought that one possible reason might be that since when we advertised, we kind of framed it with a focus on the children, and that might have sort of been a barrier for perhaps seeking treatment, in that they perhaps, it's a tough thing to identify my child as being harmed by a co-parent drinking, and then you perhaps filter those advertisements. So, I mean, that might be one explanation. For those who participated, it was important with this anonymous participation. Well, I mean, since they were screened anonymous and indicated a positive score on risk for violence, perhaps more people than if they would have attended a clinic in physical form actually acknowledged that they were in risk for violence. So perhaps this is the accurate number, so to say, and that we perhaps don't ask people enough about risk for violence. Providing structured support leads to decreased drinking in co-parent, although in this study it didn't differ between programs. Dedicated parent-child time recommended for similar interventions. We could discuss that, of course. Those who completed the program felt empowered and acknowledged, and according to themselves, it led to behavior change. I mean, we haven't asked those who didn't complete the program, so we don't know what they perhaps would say, but among the completers, this is what they described. I mean, we think since it is a self-help program and in that respect cost effective, or at least has low cost, it might be offered as a first step for help seeking parents. That might be one possibility. Acknowledgements, several persons included, of course, in this work, and here are some of these, both co-authors and co-supervisors, I should say, for Ola, Veronica Ekström and Malin Bergström. Oh. That was my presentation. I don't know if I should take down the presentation or if it should.
I think it's fine at the moment. So if there are any questions,
take it down for the moment,
yeah,
so you can see everybody. As soon as we take it down, hopefully you go back to seeing everybody, and then that will be good for the discussion.
Yeah, now I can
wonderful.
see you.
So thank you very much for your excellent talk on this important subject, and I'm sure there might be quite a few comments and questions. I already must announce I have several, but before that, I would like to check whether there are any questions or remarks from the audience. Probably people first have to sort out. So, I see Övind has got a question or remark.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for a very nice presentation. And I was just wondering, when you showed the picture of the SDQ, I think, the children, and you said there were no significant changes, but was it sort of a trend or that went downwards that you could see? Or I don't know that instrument, so I don't know if it's better if it goes down or better if it goes up. So although the intervals, of course, were overlapping. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's actually better if it goes down. I should have said that, of course, but it usually is, but not always. No, that's a good question. Actually, there was a trend for a decrease in scores in the SPARE group, but the scale might have been a little bit misleading in the slide. It didn't start at the 0 score, so the change was actually not that huge and non-significant. But I mean, if you want to be, but as I said, we had a power problem in the study since we didn't reach at all the expected number of participants. So it was difficult to say really anything about that.
Yeah, thank you.
And then there's Candice.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that. That was quite an interesting presentation. I think whenever I hear about online work, I tend to reflect on how this would work in my context. So just for context, I'm from South Africa. And so, you know, I tend to think about how online spaces would work in contexts like mine with load shedding and all of those things that happen in the space. But I'm just wondering, I just have a couple of questions, if that's okay, if I could just pose them and then you could respond to them. But I wanted to just ask about the significance of the children's ages, 3 to 11, why that particular age. And I'm asking that because out of interest, but I'm also just thinking about how older children would respond differently and also soak up what's happening around them in different ways. So adolescents are like this at-risk period, right? So I'm just wondering about your thoughts around that. And then I wanted to ask you also the exclusion around illicit drug use. I get it. But I wanted to just get some thoughts around what do you think would have been different if you allowed that group in? And also, how would you operationally, like how would you have operationalized the project differently if you had that particular group? And again, I'm asking just because, you know, our context is often that people are using multiple substances, and I'm sure it's the case in different spaces as well. So I'm just wondering about that. And then what would you have done if, or I don't know if you had a protocol around this, if you were to find that participants were, you received negative results. So for example, the participants expressed that they had diminished experiences, that they had perhaps increased exposure to violence during the time frame. And then my last question was, what was the time frame in terms of your inclusion criteria for the person using substances? So, you know, people who are new to substance use might have a different experience in terms of the family than someone who who's you've been living with the substance for such a long time that you almost become used to the behavior, and so you might not be able to recognize when the child is going, you know, when the behavior changes, because I mean we are relying on, you know, a secondary person's reflections of what's happening with the child. So yeah, those were just some of my questions. Thank you. But yeah, very interesting.
Thank you. I'll try to remember the full question. Perhaps you need to remind me. But
sure.
If I take the last question first, I mean it was a complex design, since we had we had selection criteria both for the for 3 persons actually, both for the child regarding age, and they were also supposed to have, they were supposed to be affected in some way, to have a score above a certain level on this outcome measure. And then we had inclusion criteria. I mean, the most the one that you speak about mostly is the inclusion criteria regarding the people with alcohol use disorder. And then I mean, and I completely agree. I mean that's part of the problem, that you kind of perhaps get used to the situation. It's difficult to sort of you normalize the situation. But and that might be, of course, a limitation. Might lead to I don't know, perhaps exclusion of participants, not necessary, because they underrated the problem situation. But we tried to ask the questions according to, according to how it is generally stated. I mean, for all it's the consumption during the last year, and of course that and also ICD-10 criteria. But then of course that's a composite score in itself, and people usually score how it has been during, I don't know, the last month or something. So I mean it has limitations, but it's that's the best we could do. Since we didn't meet them actually. They were screened. I didn't say that perhaps, but they were, it was a self-screening procedure. Why we excluded participants with illicit drugs? I mean, I mean, I think retrospectively, I think that might not have been necessary, but we were, I would say, overcautious when we designed the study. Since this was the first, I mean, internet-based, non-therapist guided program, at least in Sweden, we wanted to have those. I mean, that might be a false conclusion, but we wanted those who weren't in a too severe situation. And then, I mean, the easiest thing is perhaps to exclude those who are exposed to violence and exposed to a co-parent using illicit drugs. But I mean, that those two populations were those who sought the program to the highest degree. So, and I would say, I should say that also, that those participants were actually they were taken care of in an expanded version of this program, therapist guided treatment. So we didn't just leave them, but they weren't a part of this study. So so that was the main then you have to remind me.
I was asking about the age. I was asking about the ages for the children, the 3 to 11 years. What was that?
Well, actually, the age range was based on that the outcome measure SDQ is between 3 and 11 years old, and so we wanted to, and that is because then you still have I mean, even if it's a big difference between a 3-year-old and an 11-year-old child, from this rating perspective, it's the figures can still be compared. So that was the reason.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was one other question that I don't remember now.
Yeah, I was asking about how did you have a protocol to respond to people who would disclose, perhaps through your qualitative work, or even, I don't know if you had any questions around the severity of what's happening in the home. If you found that things were getting worse, significantly worse for them, was there a protocol around supporting them?
Yeah, they were, if they were contacted if they indicated violence during the course of the study. And there were some cases, and then they were contacted by study staff, and in some cases they were referred or to another treatment provider. But also there were cases, I mean, when you actually, I mean, digged into the question, it wasn't that severe situation, so they could still remain in the study. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are also some issues that came up in the chat, especially regarding barriers and potential aspects like fear of and stigmatization and being judged, which might make it more difficult to reach the specific target group you have addressed. But Alicia has raised her hand and Jim has raised his hand. So, Alicia.
Hi, can you hear me? I was having tech issues. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. And I think such an important intervention that doesn't address just one of the issues, because people don't typically fall in just one bucket or the other, but really evaluates or tries to address the AFM as also a parent, which is excellent. And then of course the role of the co-parent as well. And very well designed study. I'm sorry that the power was not what you needed it to be. That's all of our worst nightmares. My question is, well, I have 2 questions. I'm sorry. I'll kind of combine them. So and I apologize if I miss this. The All Children in Focus intervention, has that ever shown efficacy in outcomes specific to children, or was this the first attempt to measure the impact on children? I saw that you had listed some effects on the parents.
Yeah, it has shown effect, but not in an AUD kind of context, but in other contexts it has shown to be an efficacious program.
Excellent. And then my other question was, because I can just see how important and the, you know, really broad utility of this. Are you thinking of making any changes to the intervention and reevaluating, or do you feel like this is really just an issue of it being underpowered? And do you have plans to conduct another analysis?
I think we actually did an internet delivered version of just craft for concerned significant others to partners with alcohol problems, not a child focus at all. And what we found there was that it was a little bit difficult for the participants to kind of work through all the text that was included in the program. I don't know, it's kind of a psychologist sickness that you want to explain everything to everyone, and the participants just, you know, they so we actually, and that was a lesson also from and that program we developed, and we made it much more easily accessible. We developed films and you know, more interactive material, which has proven to be much more user friendly, and we're actually in the process of doing the same with this program. So I think that that is development, but as you have been raising the issue here also, to not exclude, to not have such harsh exclusion criteria to increase availability of the program. I think that is also a development, not related to the program content, but
yes, yeah. Hopefully that would help you increase your end. But I'm so glad that you're continuing with this work, and I look forward to learning what the results are of the new interactive intervention.
yeah, thank you. Yeah,
thank you very much.
One problem that we has, at least in Sweden, is that we don't have any programs for these children. They're often subjected to interventions from the social services, which are very comprehensive, and no one really knows if it's even good for the children. So it was kind of a first step to not sort of to work from another angle with a healthy parent, so to say. So it could be
so
one.
Important. And same in the US, we could totally use this.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Okay, then there's Jim next, and then Richard.
Right, Anders, thank you very much for a really interesting and I should say provocative talk. I mean, I've got a couple of questions which are related. I mean, one is, I wonder if you're being a bit too negative about the results of the trial, because looking at your key graph, which I think someone had drawn attention to already, it did look to me as if there was a definite trend downwards for the intervention group, and equally a trend upwards for the control group. And your follow-up, as you said, wasn't a very long follow-up. So I did just wonder whether really there were definite signs there that you know, there could well be a positive result. But the second point, which is you referred to and other people referred to already several times, is the possible underpowered nature of the trial.
Yeah. And
that made me think, because that's such a common thing in this field. I mean, all of us who've been working in the field have found exactly the same thing. That made me think, well, are we really, in all the work we're doing, missing the bigger question? Is the bigger question not whether we can invent this or that variation of craft or of the 5-step method or of some other method to see if we can just, you know, make things a little bit better than they otherwise would be? Is the big question, why are we not reaching more people? I mean, you started by telling us there are hundreds of thousands of people in Sweden, as there are in Britain and elsewhere, who we think are experiencing these experiences and need some form of help. Why are we not reaching them? Should we not be putting much more effort into understanding that? And you know, is it because of the stigma? If we can establish it's because of stigma, then we should be trying to do something about stigma. I was very taken with what one of your participants said, which was that she didn't feel eligible. I think you used the word eligible.
Yeah.
So I think and I think there's probably something in that of all these hundreds and thousands of people out there, I think a lot of people are feeling, yeah, I'm suffering, but it's not really my problem. It's his problem, or it's her problem. It's I'm not eligible for help here. If that's the case, might be, it's just a hypothesis. If that's the case, we should know. We should be able to do something about it. So are we missing the bigger question? Is really my question to you.
I think there are several persons in this well-educated audience who have much to say about that question, and but if I should say something, I mean, you already touched about the stigma, which we know is equally apparent in this population as in the patient population. So, I mean, one thing is, of course, how you address them, and I mean, it's difficult. We really tried to, you know, in the advertisements that we had, to address them in such a non-stigmatized way as we could. We really worked on that, but even so, it was very difficult to reach them. But I mean, there might be other persons here who have wise suggestions on how to approach them. But I think, I mean, as for our patients, I mean, that's the big problem. If we get them into treatment, we know that they, I mean, a certain part recover, but I mean, we don't reach the patients either. And I mean, in our studies on relatives, we know, and when we ask them about, I mean, have your person with AUD sought treatment, and they respond negatively, it's not always because the identified patients don't want to seek treatment. It's also that they don't know how to seek treatment or where, or that they also feel the stigma, so they don't. I mean, there are problems on many levels here, which we really should address. So I think you're very, very right about that concern.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Anders. I'll try not to repeat. I agree with loads of the other questions, and you've answered many of them, so I'll try not to repeat them. But thank you, firstly, very much for such a well-explained as well as well-designed program and well-organized RCT. I thought it was all excellent. And I think it's brilliant that you tried to look at both the alcohol and the parenting side. There are often debates about which one's more important or which one comes first and so on. And it just seems obvious that you need to deal with both. So it was just lovely that that's what you did. I want to question the issue about violence and excluding people where there was a risk of violence, because it seems to me that we run the risk in lots of our work of doing projects which exclude the very people we're trying to help. And in a sense, saying, because this is a sort of relatively new and experimental thing we're trying to do, what we're going to do is actually play safe and not do the project with the people who really need it. Seems to me, I think, potentially problematic. So I'd just like to have your views on whether you would do it differently, knowing what you now know, both because of how that would have improved the power, but also just because it feels quite wrong to be not offering, and I know you said you offered it anyway to these people. You didn't leave people who were subject to violence completely in the lurch. But nevertheless, for this project, it just seems a pity to have excluded that, which is so important. That's one question. The second question.
I can answer
okay.
you.
Do. Yeah.
Because, and I can answer you short. We already have to change that in our current studies. I think, I mean, if I would do it again, we would not exclude those, and we don't do that now in our studies on CSOs, because as you say, I mean, they have a lot to learn in craft, for example, and they get more prepared for possible violent situations. But it was only based on previous studies in which, I mean, the participants were excluded because if you change your behavior, it could kind of enrage the people. But I think that is that never happens. So we actually.
Well, no, I think actually it can happen, and it is a potential problem. We've had exactly the same thing in the 5-step method, where people have said we shouldn't be offering the 5-step method in situations where there's a potential for domestic violence. But I have my own real worries about that, because I think that we're in a situation where there is always a potential for domestic violence, and those are the very people we should be offering most help to rather than least help. Okay. The second question I wanted to ask was about the research component, and obviously Gallus and Jim and others will know that this is a discussion we're currently having anyway with a project we're trying to develop about the 5-step method. But I wonder how much research, how many questions researchers asked people, and to the extent to which the amount of assessment they had could be considered to be an intervention. As you'll know, assessment has many of the same properties of an intervention. And when you're dealing with people who feel very disempowered and feel they've never talked about this to anyone, and as Jim and you were talking, people feel I'm not eligible. And then somebody, a researcher, spends a long time, maybe not face-to-face, it's online, but asks lots of questions which are very central to people. Do you think that could have had a therapeutic effect, which might be why you saw changes in both groups and not solely in the intervention group?
Yeah, I think that might be a very possible reason for that, since we know that just being a part of a research study can, I mean, improve your mental health and alcohol consumption. The only thing I sometimes think in working with relatives as compared to patients is that here you kind of work through a third person. I mean, even if you as a relative take part in a study, that doesn't necessarily affect the one you are living with. But of course, I mean, it's you as a CSO who rate the behavior of the identified person. So of course it can affect how you perceive that person and everything, just as part of being in a study. So I agree. We tried to also, since we wanted to include as little research-wise as possible, also in order to not have a high attrition rate just because people, you know, the usual internet problem. But I mean, anyway, I mean, of course, they just to ask question about how are you, how are you feeling, how is your child feeling, it of course it might have an effect, which we don't have any control over in this study.
Okay, one final thing, and that's not really a question, it's more just a comment or a suggestion. And your presentation was absolutely fantastic, but one point about it is that you tend to use the word co-parent to mean different things in different slides. And sometimes the co-parent is the person with the alcohol problem, and sometimes the co-parent is the person without the alcohol problem. And just what we've done in our work is come up with a system which is just purely talk for us. And we talk about family members as people who are the people who are not the drinkers or the drug takers, and relatives as people. So one of the things about the English language, we've got two words. So we use these two words differently. And we always talk about the person with the alcohol or the drug problem as the relative. And we always talk about the other people as the family member. It just might be helpful if you do that in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Richard. I really put that on mind. It's good.
But it was fantastic. Thank you.
To avoid confusion. Thank you.
Okay, so I at least now also have the chance to ask you some questions, and I think my questions, they, I think to put them all together, also Candice asked in the chat that she's wondering what the implications for uptake of successful interventions are in terms of reach, awareness, stigma, and this may be a certain background also for my question. The first thing which you already discussed is the exclusion criteria of violence, which actually, when we did our CRAFT trial, we restricted it to real severe incidences of violence that made something like hospitalization or visiting a physician necessary. But I also wonder regarding two other exclusion criteria you have. One is severe mental health issues, how you define them, because we know that rates of depression, for example, are elevated in family members. And then you also had as an exclusion criteria the audit C scores of 4 or 5. Which matter of fact would mean that if you have got a mother who's drinking a glass of wine daily, she already would be prone to be excluded from the study. So I also wonder whether from a clinical point of view, it might be more appropriate to say, well, if you assume someone has got a mental health or addiction issue that makes the intervention not really meaningful in the first place, this might be a reason to exclude these people, because in the end, I think I understand you always need to go through ethic commission and so on, and they decide whether it's ethical to put people in danger or whatever. But on the other hand, it's also not ethical to say, well, if you've been beaten up, then sorry, we won't help you. So this is the one thing. The second issue has got to do with your with the intervention and the outcome criteria. First, you said all participants had access to a chat.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many people use this chat and whether this chat has been used by people from the control condition as well. So this might have largely influenced your findings. And regarding the outcome, first of all, I'm not sure whether large changes in the SDQ are likely in a 12 weeks follow-up. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And I wonder whether you also assessed if the, well, relative IP, whatever we might call him usually, has utilized treatment in the meantime. Because in all the US CRAFT studies, this is the holy grail of CRAFT. So yeah, quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, but very good questions, of course. And the violence question has been raised here, and I can only say that if we had, I mean, retrospectively, that was a mistake, and based on previous research, and actually now when we do our CRAFT or studies on CSOs, we only exclude if they have recently been hospitalized for due to domestic violence. So otherwise they are included. So I mean that severe mental health was defined as if they had if they had been treated for any psychotic or, I mean, hospitalized for any severe mental health. So not only, I mean, mental, not only depression or any anxiety disorder or I mean ADHD or anything. It was just defined as I mean the point of departure was that they were not supposed to have a mental condition that would be a problem for them in order to kind of sort of apply the treatment program in any way. So I don't know if that was an answer to your question, but it's only the very severe cases, so to say, and also that those might need a more, since this was not a therapist guided, I mean, and we didn't meet them, we didn't want to make any risk for them in any way. Then it was better that if they received therapist-based intervention instead. Yeah. Sorry, guys. My memory is I'm getting old here, but
Well, was whether you also assess treatment utilization by the relative and whether you think that a 12 weeks follow-up is long enough for changes in the SDQ.
Yeah. One thing now I remember was that this chat that was that might I didn't mention that, but it was a joint chat, so there it might have been, of course, a risk that the ones in the control group might have. I mean, I don't think they really exchanged craft strategies, but they might have got tips or things in the chat. So that might be what do you call it? Disseminate? No, there's a term for that. Yeah.
The contamination of conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. Contamination. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The SDQ. We talked a lot about that, and we listened to different experts since we had different opinions regarding how sensitive SDQ is to change, especially in the short run. And we ended up based on studies not in this population, but in other, I mean, studies on in populations with relatively short follow-up period, and then there we could see that there were changes also in the more short run. But of course, I mean this population might be different, so that the SDQ might not have been the optimal instrument. I don't know if there are any other better instrument, but since participating in craft again is kind of a third person thing, where first the non-drinking parent is supposed to make changes either in parental strategies or in other respects, and then perhaps have an effect on the what did you say, Richard? Should I say not the relative, the relative, the person with alcohol problem to make changes.
The relative, yes.
Yeah, the relative, and that of course might take a longer time, and to have an effect on the children's well-being might have come later. So that might be a limitation. Perhaps not so much about the instrument, but the relative short follow-up period. So absolutely limitation. Was there another question?
Do we have any data on treatment utilization by the relatives at follow-up?
No, only if they had attended a treatment during any of the, but that question was negative response in almost all cases. So that didn't seem to have happened, at least not during the follow-up for almost any of the. I don't think we even reported that in the paper actually.
I don't remember you you said that. I just maybe another last question, which might go back to Jim's bigger picture he raised, which I just wonder whether digital interventions like the one you just tested also might be an option to reach family members at an earlier stage, or to reach family members who otherwise wouldn't go to a in-person meeting. And have you also can you make an estimation based on the people you included? You had, I think, about 367 or so people who signed up.
Yeah.
And did you assess whether any one of these has already been seeking help for the drinking behavior of the relative, or whether they have all been treatment naive?
No, there was around 50, I think, who were excluded due to previous participation in some kind of program for CSOs. So that there were.
So you excluded those who have been seeking help for a CSO program.
Yeah, if they had participated in any program recently with the aim of yeah.
Okay, because actually I did also get this wrong, because I recall that I was thinking that you excluded people where the relative has already been treated.
Let's see here.
The addiction problem.
No, it was 64 actually who were excluded due to that they had already participated in some kind of support program for CSO for individuals with alcohol problems during the last 6 months, I think.
Okay.
So that was quite a large fraction of those who were excluded, about a fifth.
Okay, thank you very much. So already a few people have left us due to other dates, and so I don't know if there is a last chance to ask questions. It is now. There is, like always in the AFINet webinars, also an exchange in the chat regarding very important issues like shame, stigma, and so on.
Yeah, I can see that. It's I would really like to read all those, but I don't. So I see it's a very lively discussion. That's great.
Well, usually I think Richard captures them all, so as far as I remember. But well, from my side now, I just once more would like to thank you for your excellent presentation, and I think the debate we had here and in the chat might serve as a certain appetizer for the upcoming AFINet conference in Rotterdam. And now I'm just a last question to Richard. Are you copying the chat, or is there an option so that others can go through all the notes that have been made?
Normally, Emmy or Sari does that. So hopefully, Emmy, you can get a copy of the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Brilliant. So if you send that to me and Anders, that would be brilliant.
Wonderful. Emmy also. I just saw a hand, but I think it was just more or less an okay. Okay, so again, I would like to thank all of you for being here at the webinar, and of course, many thanks also to Emmy, who made this webinar technically possible, and to Richard for organizing all this, and of course to Anders and to Ole as well. Ola, who couldn't join us today, but send him our regards, and we hope to see you all in Rotterdam. And the next webinar, I should also announce it, but since I would have to search for it, I would hand over to Richard.
Well, it's because it hasn't been confirmed yet.
Okay.
So it will be in April, 2 months hence, and it will be in the second or third week, as always, in April. But I cannot yet. I'd hoped to be able to tell you today who it was going to be delivered by, but I can't yet. But there will be one in April, and then again in June.
Wonderful. So I wish you all a good night for the ones in India. Have a nice day to the one more in the US, and a nice evening to everyone in Europe. And hope to see you at the next webinar and later in Rotterdam.